Om Pramadina na sandeha kim karshami vrittiman utpadyante vilyante buddhascha yata jale. Om Shantihi, Shantihi, Shantihi. Ignorance is unreal. Therefore, how can it cause you any real doubt? Therefore, what does the yogi do with his mind and its projections? He allows them to rise spontaneously, then dissolves them all back at the end of the day, like bubbles into water. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Satna Vidyate Bhavo Na Bhavo Vidyate Sataha. Ubiyor api dirsantos, tuanayos tattva darshibihi. Om Shantihi, Shantihi, Shantihi. The unreal never is. The real never ceases to be. The truth about both of these has been realized by the seers. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Satyena, Om Satyena labhyastapasa yesatma samyagyanena brahmacharyena nityam antaha sharirehi jyotirmayohi shubraha yam pashanti atayaha kshina Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. The Atman, the indivisible self in all beings and all things, is realized by knowledge, by moderation, by austerity, and by veracity. All of these constantly cultivated. When mental impurities dissolve due to this practice, then the seer beholds it everywhere, existing in everything, even here in this very mind and body. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Sahana, Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vidvishovahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman, divine reality, protect us. May it sustain us. May it illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the teachings, or with the world. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us. May peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. Now we have all arrived at this point in time, or to get right into the subjects, this appearance of time in Maya, where we are going to look into the teaching of the 16 evolutes of Maya, also the characteristics and limitations and what's called the 7 malas, or imperfections of Maya. And I'm very happy to be able to present this again after such a long time. There is a YouTube series of classes on it some years ago. And there's also appearance of it in our very first Nectar of Non-Dual Truth Advaita Vedanta magazine back in 2000, where I presented this very voluminous paper that I had composed with all the things about Maya and Shakti and Mahamaya, of course, when you speak about Shakti, in the form of an article, and put the main elements of it, like the graph and some of the things that you see here on this chart on your left-hand side, which we will get to right away, into that article in Nectar. And at that time showed it around when I went to India in that year 2000. That was also the year which I promised myself that I would go to the source of the Ganges before I was 50 years old. So when I was 50, I did it. As I was born in 1950, and that was the year 2000 that I went to that trip, some of my students, and we went to Gangotri up there and then hiked up to Cow's Mouth with the opening, and that you're just expecting something grand, and you get up to the source of the Ganges and it's very understated. It's just coming out of this kind of slit in the earth. And I waded out there in the freezing water, which I later said is why I understand why Shiva and Vishnu have turned blue if they bathe in those waters, because I turned blue, it was so cold, and got some water from the source and brought it home, and we've been using it in our pujas for the last 20 years, all that supply I brought back on the airline. Back then when you didn't have to worry about bringing containers of water into the cabin. So all of that reminds me, as I immediately think back in the memory of these profound and auspicious times, that I took that Nectar of Non-Dual Truth magazine with me and showed it around to the Swamis of the Ramakrishna order, where we went in Almora and on the way up to the Ganges and to Mayavati and various places. And I remember in a couple cases I left a copy of the journal I had overnight with the Swamis that were in charge there, and came back the next day and to get the copy back and to have darshan with them, and said, how did you like that issue? And they took it out and opened it up and flipped the pages to the 16 Evolutes of Maya, put it in front of me and said, we like this very much. So there were some other very good things there in that Nectar, but I realized that those were just kind of ho-hum things to Gyanis, that is, people who study the Dharma all the time. That's why part of the reason why they quit the world is to spend a lot of time in the scriptures, particularly what we call the revealed scriptures, Shruti, which has to be heard in your lifetime at least once. If you have heard it in a Western country, you're very fortunate. And then also to have this experience of everything that obscures or tries to obscure that dharmic truth from you. And a lot of the other sectors of the world, what we call householders, or people who are living just worldly lives and don't have any religious or spiritual activities, people who are into evil preoccupations, which we'll see how that happens by some of these evolutes, how they get a hold of the mind, and how much it would be valued then to find a rare teaching like this. And I must say that after so many years, I was beginning to wonder where I got that teaching. And I looked back on it the other day and saw that a lot of it came out of Shaivism, my studies of Kashmiri Shaivism and a couple of the other schools of Shaivism, to sort of put this together into a graph and a chart, they call it, and how vast a subject it is, which then put me in mind of Swami Vivekananda's visit to the West in 1893, where the word Maya had sort of preceded him. There were already some people coming from India, bringing Tantra and Yoga and so forth. I think he was the first one that really brought the Vedanta and encapsulated it and accented it as a darshana to follow for us. You know, the Westerners were ready for that, and he could have picked any of the other 5 darshanas, but he settled in on the Vedanta because some of us were highly intellectual and could very much benefit from these high-minded teachings of spirituality, which are very rare, if at all, in America at that time. England too. So when he came, he brought that, and when he heard that word Maya being used by the people in 1893 in Europe and America, he said they were calling it illusion, and he was puzzled. He said, "Where did you get that definition?" Maya is a statement of fact. And so you see in his complete works, which is a collection of all those many 50s, hundreds of lectures he gave in after he gave to people, after this great splash he made at the Parliament of Religion that put him in the mind's eye of everyone, that he was speaking several lectures in that complete works, we call it now, which are not books he wrote, because he didn't really write books. He spoke and they took him down, and then in a couple cases, like Raja Yoga, he went through and made a few edits to his speaking. But basically, these are the horse's mouth, or I like to call it the cow's mouth. Talk about the source of the Ganges again, and coming from that sacred animal, the way they worship the cow in India, rightly so. And so straight from that source of Swami Vivekananda about Maya and what it means, that it's a statement of fact, and then he gave a new definition to it, which follows that teaching of the quintuplication process. I have a chart on that, which I'll probably show 2 weeks from now, the subtle meaning of Maya. We'll get into some of the grosser meanings and some of the cosmic meanings of it. But if you're talking about a fivefold definition for Maya, it really puts it in a place where you can contemplate it and understand it more comprehensively. Name, nama, form, rupa, desha, time, space, kala, time, and nimitta, cause and effect. So nama, rupa, desha, kala, nimitta is his definition for Maya to try and correct what people were calling illusion. Now, there's no doubt that the son of a barren woman, or mother of pearl, diamonds in Diamond Head, as we say here in Hawaii. The sailors saw the lava glistening and they thought they were rich. So this false appearance of things is there, and those are more along the grosser evolutes of Maya, appearances that must be seen through unless you're to fall victim to false superimposition and the ignorance and suffering it causes later down the line. You accept something that's false, you proceed on that falsity, or it causes more falsities, evolutes, and pretty soon your whole society and your whole life, you're born into societies that are thinking falsely. And then it gives way to all sorts of other evolutes that could even be worse than the ones I'm about to talk to you about. But we are talking today about Krishna's two paths on the way here in our vahana, in our vehicle, our Garuda that brought us here. And Krishna's teaching in there about, in the beginning, I created the two great paths for mankind. So right away you're to infer that in the beginning means the beginning of a Mahayuga, because time has no beginning. Number two, you're to infer that in the beginning there means that for anyone who dares to take embodiment, I'll give them these two paths. But I'm not necessarily recommending that you take embodiment. You'd have to say that about the Indian darshanas. Then for those who do take embodiment, there's a sunlit path and a moonlit path. Surya and Chandra. So basically the sunlit path, by that they come never to return again. Come and go, never to return again. And by the moonlit path, they come and go to return again, basically is the teaching there. And so you're to see then that these two great paths are for beings who have taken embodiment, and anyone who takes embodiment will immediately come under the auspices of Maya. Guess who else comes under the auspices of Maya? The Ishvara form. And guess what other great principle comes under the auspice of Maya? Om. And all its four phases come under the auspice of Maya. So you're having a very profound look at something that's existing at all levels, gunas, even unmanifested prakriti, all under the auspice of Maya. And of course, there's where we have to qualify by saying there's such a thing as Maya, which most people would shirk back from and say, oh, it's illusory and it's deluding, be very careful of that. But then there's also what's called Mahamaya. Much like saying Brahman is real, the world is unreal, and most people go, oh, the world's unreal, and then they go on weeping about that. But they forgot that Brahman is real. You see. And then the same way, this teaching about Maya and Mahamaya, they react to Maya, and then they forget Mahamaya. And I can tell you, she's very easy to forget. I say she's more easy to forget than Brahman and your true nature, because that will be suggesting itself to you every day, your true nature, by suffering, by knowledge, by study, by meditation, even by ignorance. You'll have to face off with knowledge because of your ignorance, and so you're facing off with this principle of Mahamaya who's in you. But she very seldom makes any kind of appearance in you. Maya will make all sorts of appearances. Her middle name is appearance. You might as well call her Maya false superimposition, or Maha false superimposition Maya, because that's the way it all works. So I'm bringing this up because this is a really wonderful part of this teaching, a teaching that could be very morose and very depressing if you concentrated just on the 16 evolutes. This would be an eye-opener. But that's why I brought up the sunlit and moonlit path, because as I was thinking about that and talking with my students about it, I'm thinking that the sunlit and moonlit path both have bitter teachings to them. So there's another teaching in the Gita which says, sort of like the unreal never is, the real never ceases to be kind of thing. There's another teaching that says you must beware of what's sweet in the beginning, because it turns sour later, he says. This is Ishvara, Krishna. And then he would say the opposite too. What you really want is what's bitter in the beginning and what turns sweet later. So the bitter, of course, we've often said is, oh, I have to get up and do some sadhana here to discipline myself, because Maya is everywhere seeping into the cracks of even my deep sleep and into my actions without me knowing it. Vidila set, as they say, or as it were, it's why nobody has a word for it except India. And so they don't know how to pinpoint, at least a generalization even, what is flummoxing everyone, what's making them think that they should go for what's sweet in the beginning and not take what's sour. That is, I want only the pleasure, only the good, and the bad and the negative I want to get rid of, as if that were ever possible. And so that's a kind of problem. I mean, we're thinking about, we should add somewhere in the middle here, societal evolutes of Maya, because there are so many nowadays. And so we could have the more personal evolutes of Maya, we could have the cosmic ones, which I hope we get to, because I've never taught them. And then we'd have these societal evolutes of Maya. And, right now, at the time of COVID and all this that's going on in the world with politics and protests and everything, it would be a great revelation to put some of those out there so that people could see that what they're dancing to, whether the dance is of violence or whether the dance is of altruism or whether the dance is of positivity or negativity or mixed, that it's all in Maya. And that there's a Mahamaya whom you can go to solve the problem for all time, as if it were a problem in the first place, because the seers are saying the unreal never is. See, why are you making the unreal real? And why are you grasping only onto what seems to be good and then doing acts of good stupefaction, as Lord Copula says, and then suffering later and not knowing the reason why? Well, it couldn't be because we did good things that this bad thing happened, could it? Well, you don't know Maya very well then if you think that. And there's no really straight and narrow path up and out of it unless you're to contact your own intelligence, discriminating intelligence, see. Because, and that's Mother. Discriminating intelligence is her favorite tool. So all of this is my usual preamble to a subject that could be very bitter. It is bitter, but in a good way. You've heard of bitter herbs, I suppose, and bitter medicine that you need to take. But it also could be very poorly presented if you're just going to stick with the negative side of it. It's sort of trying to make people fear things so that they'll get better. Never been a very good route. The fire-darting reformer route, as Swami Vivekananda called it. So what we're looking at in the teachings, basically, of Shaivism and Lord Vashishta, because if you remember a month or so ago, we were going through the discourse of divine discontent that Sri Ram was giving out to the court of King Dasaratha with Vashishta as his teacher. And he just came out with everything, a diatribe, as they say nowadays, against everything in Maya, and took up Maya itself at the end. So we didn't get to go through that part of that, so here it is now. I might as well connect this back to that series of classes called Sri Ram's Discourse of Divine Discontent, because Maya is one of the things that we only mentioned, but here it is, just unfolding exponentially as we take these next 3 weeks of classes on it. So in that light then you have this very powerful double presentation of Maya you're going to have to look into. And I wanted to start off this series of classes by reading something that I should give you a preface to. So in the beginning of a Mahayuga, the Itihasa of India says, that's the scriptural history, Vishnu was sleeping on his bed of snakes, and he was awoken, and out of his navel, when he woke up, came this lotus, and it grew up into the air, and the lotus opened, and there was Lord Brahma. And Lord Brahma, the great master Sankalpa, was then going to project the worlds. I can insert another little story here. Just he was trying to project the worlds one time and it didn't work because everyone came into form and they said, "What are we doing here? Back to formlessness for us." And so Brahma went to Divine Mother and said, "Well, you gave me the bijams, like for water and air and earth and fire and ether and everything else. You gave me the bijams and I used them, I spoke them from this high position of my intelligence, and the world started to form out of them. And people started to take bodies in them." See, basically what happens, we'll look at that in a minute. But this time I did it and they didn't like it. They didn't like name, form, time, space, and causality. Why not? And she said, "Oh, shoot, my bad, you see. I kind of forgot to give you the bijam for Maya. You have to put that in everything or nothing else will work." They won't be attracted to it. They'll just prefer formlessness. So, I mean, this story, I'll go on with it, but this story I heard from in my own tradition, Vedanta, Ramakrishna order, and I also heard it from Kala Rinpoche in Tibetan Buddhism, the Tibetan Buddhist version of that very story, of the beginning of these cycles. Remember, beginnings here means Krishna saying, in the beginning I created the path of sun and moon for all these beings who wanted to take embodiment. So, but that just means the beginning of a cycle, and then a huge long sleep of Mahapralaya, and then another beginning of a cycle going on forever. So that the Gita, the battlefield in the Gita has happened billions of times and will keep happening billions of times. Why? I think it's because a couple souls get released every time a cycle goes by. Do I have credence to make that statement? Don't I? Because doesn't Krishna say in the very same Bhagavad Gita, only 1 in 1,000 ever thinks of me. And of one of those 1,000, very few ever seek me. And of one of those thousands, only one ever realizes me. So he knows that they're caught in Maya without any wherewithal to get themselves free or to remember their true nature as formless reality. The sunlit path is designed for that. The moonlit path isn't. So I could insert that into this story. Go on with the story then, is that Divine Mother gave Lord Brahma this bijam for Maya, said, "Plant this and try again." So in his Sankalpa, which is a big meditation, just like you projecting the 24 cosmic principles and dissolving them, every time you practice that. And when you don't practice it, when you go to sleep and dream and deep sleep and come back, it's all happening like that. Who knows about time inside of all that? You could go to sleep and, go into a coma and sleep for a year and they'll keep you alive. You come back and it's like one nighttime has passed, just like waking up from sleep, as if time doesn't really exist. So when the Kashmiri Shaivites say, Maya begins at Kala and ends at earth, time is the very most subtlest thing that's inside of Maya. It's the first tattva that's in Maya, is time. So again, back with the story with explications, Brahma did the projection in his meditation, projected the worlds again, and make sure one of the bijams he gave, along with fire, air, earth, water, and ether, and so forth, was that Maya bijam. And people were born then in these worlds and came out and loved them, you see. Oh, they're so beautiful. Look at that sunset, you see. I want to have children in this, you see. Can I own that? We're beginning to get into the evolutes of Maya already, you see. Of course, there are people who dharmically can also use this creation. Whether it makes any good or no, never mind, it's up for you to decide. It's up to the individual. Because there are individual evolutes and there are cosmic evolutes called Vyasti and Samasti. It's part of the teaching. And there probably should be some others that we might think up in the future to complement this chart. So that story I'm giving you, everyone loved Maya and they participated, so another Mahayuga could go on. That is another Satya Yuga, then followed by a Treta Yuga, followed by a Dvapara Yuga, followed by a Kali Yuga, each one twice as long, or 4 times as long, or 8 times as long as the last one, until you have one Mahayuga. Millions of years, billions of years, really, if you put those together. I'll have to consult my mathematician student here who's sitting in our class for that. See if he can come up with a number for us. And that number will also be in Maya, as he knows. So all of this, to lead up to this story I want to read you, Vishnu came out, Brahma came out of the lotus of Vishnu's navel, gave forth the teachings in form of bijams, created the worlds and everything, and then created some mind-born sons, real quick. One of the first things he did. Hopefully, any of the young people here and in SRV will create mind-born sons, not just body-born sons and daughters. This is what's needed. You have to conceive of them first, then give them birth. You can't just randomly push them out. You see the result of that kind of unconscious birthing going on in the Kali Yuga particularly all the time, and the suffering it's causing, and the ignorance that's prevalent in the society because of it. But if you look at India, if we, let's look for a country that's been doing this. There's Tibet, yes, but that was a little later. There's China, yes. Here's India and what it gave to Tibet and China and other countries. And in 1893, what it gave to America when Swamiji Vivekananda actually came over and started telling us about this great ancient Sanatana Dharma, eternal religion. And therefore, these mind-born children that Vishishta, some 10 of them, I think, in one rendering in the scriptures anyway, in the Puranas, 10 of them, and one of them was Lord Vishishta. And so I wanted, that'll save us about 10 minutes of reading to give you that opening. Now I want to read from there, from Brahma coming out of the lotus and creating these children, this next 2 paragraphs. Focusing inwardly on his own divine self, Brahma verily brought out forth from his own mind-born children who had been happily meditating in the deep bliss of oneness. Hard for me to stop and not comment. Just know that you're in oneness when you're not in the body, and the mind shut down. You're in the deep bliss of oneness, just suffice to say that. I was amongst them. After seeing him before me and having paid my reverent obeisances to him, he had me sit on one of the northern petals of his vast lotus and placed his full attention on me. So Lord Brahma has this 1,000-petaled lotus, silver, I think. That's why you meditate, and your initiation, you're told to meditate on this silver-petaled lotus, with Sri Ramakrishna sitting there, the avatar of this age. And so Brahma uses that, and each petal, represents a loka, not just a world, but a loka that's full of other worlds. And so Vasishtha came into being out of Brahma's highest thoughts, a mind-born child, and sat there on the part of the lotus. Then, surprisingly, he uttered a subtle curse on me. He invested my mind with the enigmatic Maya, and I was thus plunged into a state of ignorance, while the initial wisdom and bliss which I was born with entirely vanished. Oh, how I suffered in that condition, like a weak-minded human being, stripped of all sense of natural awareness. And though I was caught therein for only an hour, it seemed as if an age had passed. Seeing clearly the state of misery I had succumbed to, my lordly father, Lord Brahma, asked me several questions and tried to get me to describe the source of my suffering. As I could not accurately ascertain this, I pleaded with him as to how I could rid myself of this lamentable condition of bondage and suffering in Maya. After I had spoken this wish, he immediately woke me up from this sleep of ignorance, and I was suddenly my former self again, steeped in natural jnana wisdom. But although I was vastly relieved to be myself again, I remained puzzled as to the nature of this experiment, and curious as well as to the simultaneously present but illusory nature of Maya I had just experienced. What being, O Ram, because Vasishtha is telling this to Sri Ram, his young charge, later on earth. What being, O Ram, great or small, does not vex over this question in one way or another? To satisfy my yearning along these lines, Lord Brahma explained to me that it was the purpose of the great gods, like Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, that mankind be able to free himself from suffering in the worlds of name and form. And due to this decree, they had therefore placed upon the earth the boon of giving initiation into the spiritual path from an illumined preceptor. Holy company. You, next stated my father, having known afresh the pain which Maya can cause living beings, because he just put him in that, will now descend to earth in the country of Bharatavarsha, that's India. Bharata was the name of India early on. In the region of Jambu Dvipa, Dvipa is one of the regions, there to take up the task of initiating striving beings into the supreme pathway leading to the eternal moksha. I have a whole chart on that, the supreme pathway leading to the eternal moksha, everything Lord Brahma told Vasishtha in it. Remember, this is a land of perpetual karmas, my son, and beings there are striving hard, both in ignorance and with knowledge. As a result of their efforts, they either create more karmas or get rid of the ones they have. All need your help, my son, and you will become known as the great Rishi, Vasishtha, born on earth for the highest good of living beings. But know also that there are as many or more persons there on earth who apathetically submerge themselves in the mire of Maya, as unseemly as that sounds, like hogs wallowing contentedly in their own filth. These will not listen to you, nor should you waste your time upon them. Seek out those who seek out you, and only give these aspiring souls, and those souls with sincerity, this precious initiation which I have invested you with today at birth. In other words, my son, to those who have qualified themselves by gaining the incomparable sadhana chatushchaya, the 4 qualifications for attaining liberation, to them you may transmit these teachings. To those who languish and malinger, you should not do so. And as to those sincere beings seeking realization by inferior means, who are busy in ritualistic and altruistic works of relatively good and mixed value, you may instruct them into the means for fulfilling themselves in the Dharma. They must qualify themselves in preparation for learning right means and proper discernment, so as to arrive at the understanding that higher wisdom exists and must be sought after, that only that Atmagyan is truly conducive to freedom, that is, knowledge of the true self. For we have ordained that all souls should be initiated into the highest wisdom of Atmagyan only after striving for and attaining the 4 qualifications. Thus spoke forth my unique Father. So a beautiful segment out of that Yoga Vashishta scripture, which I wanted to read straight off the bat before we enter into the bulk of these teachings over the next 3 weeks. So with that said, and probably to maybe broach the subject of Maya, let me read one more paragraph here about what Maya is. So this is from this very voluminous article I wrote. You can see back in around, and I was working on before the year 2000, that has much more that's on this chart in it. I'm going to try and bring some of those aspects in for it, but some other research was done. So in the agamas, or the teachings of Tantra, particularly in Shaivism, it describes Maya this way: the formless material of the tattvas of the impure order. It is both real and unreal, sad asat. So it's both sat and asat, real and unreal. It's real since it is the material of which the worlds are made of, and unreal because it creates illusion and does not constitute man's true nature, the nature of Shiva. Maya creates illusion, which is moha in individual minds. A jiva's delusion, jiva means embodied soul, a jiva's delusion arises when it cannot make any distinction between atma and anatma, the true self and the non-self, and instead identifies the true self with the non-self and the non-self with the self, right there, among the first 2 evolutes of Maya. So that's about as clear as I could make it from the scriptures and condense it down into something that would be comprehensible to Westerners in this day and time, so that we had even a further explication of what Maya is. So one thing to add to that, Maya is the eternal, indestructible, and sentient principle of the world, common to all individual selves, and the material cause of their bodies and instruments of enjoyment. Its powers range from kala, which is time, all the way down to earth, kshiti. It is not just the sum total of 3 gunas, but it is more subtle than time, and more subtle than avyakta prakriti and all its evolutes. It is the essential fineness of materiality. It is also the source of the 4 levels of vibration, Vaikari, Madhyama, Pashanti, and Para. That's the 4 stages of the word, of which I have a chart here to show you about. Maya does not cause illusion alone, it also causes illumination. It does not act upon the soul, but stimulates it through its products. Further, in its pure form, Mahamaya, it is the power by which Shiva assumes different forms, to enjoy, bhoga, to dissolve things, laya, and to teach, adhikara. So that's a good way to end this reading, because now we know Maya is also an illuminator. For instance, we'll show you probably next week this teaching on the Prakasha Shakti. See, so there are 3 kinds of Shakti in that way. There's the covering power, there's the distorting power, making something look like other than it is, and then there's the revelatory power. And we don't get the teaching of revelatory power that often. Probably that's why we don't experience it that often. But anytime you understand something in a flash, that's Divine Mother Shakti, using her Prakasha Shakti to wake you up. And what we want is that on a spiritual level. We want to awaken from the whole dream of this whole process, including the dream of Ishvara in the end. You get to the Father through the Son implies that you must get to the Father, doesn't it? So this formless reality is something of the highest import and merit, and it's your true nature too. So number one, why shouldn't you be having experience of that? And number two, why shouldn't you be bending all efforts to have that if you don't have it yet, or if you don't remember it? It's all a matter of forgetfulness and remembrance, and whose doing is that? That's Maya's doing, with her false superimpositions and conditionings, and her limitations, and her characteristics, and her evolutes. So I hope that's good for opening. I have a little more reading to do. We'll keep this handy. But before the break, and this is a lot to be taking in already, you can see how profound the word Maya and it's the principle of Maya is. So I'll call forth my chart of this same thing, and we'll start at the top. There you see in the box some 6 words that we could use for absolute reality. Of course, Parabrahma, the Supreme Brahman, nameless, formless, timeless, spaceless. I mean, it's beyond any idea of Maya. Here I should bring in the teaching of Sri Ramakrishna when he says Brahman and Maya, and people would ask about that, and mostly they would ask about it from the standpoint of 2 different things, because they're thinking, how could Maya ever be Brahman, and how could Brahman ever be Maya? We know this much at least, you see. So they're not prepared for the answer. Maya is in Brahman, because only Brahman exists. So anything that has an existence must be based on Brahman. So you can't separate Brahman from its Maya. So how to understand that when Brahman is ever pure, ever free, and beyond all of Maya's evolutes, beyond even time, space, and the 3 gunas, rajas, tamas, sattvas, desha, kala, nimitta, unaffected by any of that. Well, here's how you understand it, Sri Ramakrishna said. Maya exists in Brahman like poison exists in a snake. And further explication came, but the snake doesn't die because the poison's in it. It doesn't even feel it. And further warning, be careful you don't get bit by the snake. So you're in Brahman all the time. Beware of its Maya, you see. To quote again, beware of Maya, words of a song of a popular pop group back in the 60s. Beware of Maya. Little did they know what they were talking about when they said that, king of all 4 other words, if you know what I mean. So Parabrahma, the Supreme Brahman, Parashakti would be the same thing, dynamic power in the supreme form. We usually think of Durga and Kali for that kind of a... they even sing about that in the scriptures when they talk about Maya and Mahamaya, because those are the next words there, you see. Mahashakti, Mahamaya. Put one in English there just so we know what we're talking about. The Divine Mother, and another is Shaktiman. The Shakti is everywhere, which I'll show you with the 4 Shaktis here. But there's an operator of the 4 Shaktis. The 4 Shaktis are willpower, special knowledge, the ability to move and to act spontaneously, in her case, and producer of substances. So the 5 elements and everything that we've been talking about, if she gave 24 cosmic principles to the mind of Lord Copula, and that was Prakasha Shakti to him, and he all of a sudden went, I have a system, this is ancient as the mother herself, and she just gave me the 24 cosmic principles, I'm going to introduce them here to you now, then you know that it was given to him through the operator of the Shakti, and it came through all the way down to Drovya Shakti. Well, she told me that she produces substances through nature, using the prana, and with some sort of willpower. What does it remind you of? Last week, the week before, and the week before that, we were talking about the missing link of prana, akasha, tanmatras. So this is producer of substances, and it all comes from high-minded thinking and thought. Saw a movie on Charles Darwin recently, and liked it. You don't want to play into the hands of the Darwinists. Swami Vivekananda said when he was here, he found out what the scientists were thinking. But nevertheless, Darwin was not trying to discount the existence of God as many thought he was doing. He was looking into the origin of species. Anytime you look into the origin of something, you're getting back to the roots of form. See, why the bird and the monkey and the human form all have the same skeletal shape, same facets of skeleton. He was looking into these kinds of things. So he was moving towards a primal cause of things, who was Dravya Shakti, who thought up these designs, and who radiated them down, emanated them down into the thinking mind, through the gods, through the ancestors, into intelligent-minded people, so that they could know at least the first realm, the first world. The big mistake then being letting Maya's evolutes catch them off guard and not seeking for the origin beyond physical things, that they didn't know where it was coming from. So Shaktiman has a powerful connotation to it. The one who operates all of Shakti means all four major Shaktis, plus a bunch of little Shaktis I'll show you in a minute. Anyway, they sing about this, as I was about to say, inside of the tradition when they think about Mahashakti. Namaste Sharanye Shive Sanukampe Namaste Jagadvyapike Vishvarupe Namaste Jagadvanya Padarvinde Namaste Jagadtarini Traidurge Namaste Jagachincha Manasvarupe Namaste Mahayogini Gyanarupe Namaste Sadananda Svarupe Namaste Jagadtarini Traidurge. And on with verses. Beautiful, auspicious verses to the Divine Mother of the Universe. And by beings who have studied her from time out of mind, who stay close to her, and who know her as Mahamaya, Mahashakti, Durga, Kali, Tara, in words here. Great bijams of their own, like very powerful bijams. Probably before Lord Brahma used the bijams of earth, fire, water, and ether, and Maya and all that, he probably thought the bijams of Kali, Durga first, to bless the whole endeavor. I might as well throw Ganesha in there too, to make sure it all goes forward without a hitch as far as possible, at least until it reaches the unintelligent levels of mind. So that comes to mind when I think of these 4 or 5 great, 6 great appellations that I've signed here. Out of all of that comes the Paravid. And here is something I'm not going to go into at length, but we have gone into it several times, and it's a very beautiful creation from a devotee of the Mother and a friend of SRV who put together this temple in the sky, which is kind of my vision. Can you create a temple ceiling in the sky for me, in the ether? And I'm going and leave windows and various things in it And I'm going to put various things in there to kind of show. So we'll have to leave this chart a second while we look into para and apara vidya. And I have this somewhat in order, unlike me who likes to go a lot spontaneous. Even got notes here to help me. Para and apara vidya. Basically, para, supreme, because we had that here with para Brahma and para Shakti. Supreme, you can't think of anything higher, deeper, greater than that. Para is the word. It's also the fourth stage of the word, or if you're looking top down, first stage of the word, where everything is formless ecstasy, homogeneous bliss of pure conscious awareness, samadhi if you want, or nirvana. So anapara, then if you put an A in front of Sanskrit words like that, it means pretty much the opposite. Or so you have this higher wisdom that belongs to Divine Mother, and then you have her other belonging, like the chest of drawers teaching, further into the chest of existence, there's these lower and lower realms of knowledge. We'll go through that real quick in a minute, but this reading will help. It has been stated that it is not wise to enter into analysis of Maya's domain. Sri Ramakrishna, never study Maya up close. If you're going to study it all, do so from a distance. Because he was born in 1800, so he saw science going on. He saw people trying to look into the life of plants and other things that they were trying to do and render some sense out of the whole thing as the English were invading his country, or about to. So he had to think in terms of people who study Maya's domain thinking it's real, and then these marvelous people who just stand back and know it to be this big prestidigitation of hand, 5-fingered prestidigitation. It's like a magician. A sleight of hand, they call it. They're very beautiful English terms I found for this. I have a list of about 8 of them I dug out of Webster's dictionary. Oh, that pertains to Maya. I had to look through the whole thousands of pages to find it, but these are good, like legerdemain. Oh, I like that one. Let's put that in the list, you see. So this whole sleight of hand that's going on that fools everyone, flummoxes everyone, even up to the high-minded seers if you're not careful, you see. There are those who can withdraw from that and see the whole thing as a divine play, or a sport, or a dream, a lila, a play of consciousness, and then words that are less kind to it, like illusion and so forth. I didn't get very far, did I? So, Sri Ramakrishna's statement that you have to study Maya from a distance. Ignorance binds only those who are without knowledge of their true nature. Each one of these sentences is like a mantra. It is a striving being through awareness of supreme truth, Paravid, who gains enlightenment and comes to realize the self within as eternal, indivisible consciousness. Then Maya's powers are rendered harmless. This is instanced by the Divine Mother's Daivi Maya, which she uses to create forms, circumstances, and locations for the work of her avatars, devotees, and other luminaries. For others, scientists, politicians, lawyers, mathematicians, physicians, authors, artists, workers, and the rest, if they are as yet unaware of their divine nature, they play right into Maya's hands and remain in the dark about Paravidya. Not hard to prove that statement by looking at the world. What to speak of having even heard of Divine Mother? Is there anyone who's not offering everything they discover to the ego instead of her? Is there anyone? See? And among those few that do, they get higher intelligence. They have discriminating intelligence. They have viveka. Out of touch with reality, they enter into the mode of Vaichitra, varieties and become preoccupied with exacting analysis of Maya through the avenues of science, physics, math, literature, arts, and other subjects. This is the one main drawback of pursuing aparavidya as the highest aim. It can lead towards higher knowledge if utilized in conjunction with moral and ethical living, but quite often embroils the mind in a futile obsession with details and superficialities, drawing it down into habits of restlessness and lethargy, and leading the way from true fulfillment. Aparavidya also conduces to worldliness, as it takes the mind away from higher pursuits and avenues of expression and places it on purely conventional modes of attachment. Purely conventional modes of attainment, such as fame, success, family life, pleasantries, gathering sustenance, etc. Then the truths contained in Paravidya, the eternal sacred principles of non-dual truth, comprehensive wisdom, unalloyed bliss, inner peace, and transcendent nature of pure conscious awareness, which is beyond name and form, remain undiscovered. So that is a condensation of teachings in Yoga Vashishta and Tantra Shaivism about para and aparavidya. Where do you find it? Where is higher wisdom? For most of the world, it's in aparavidya. I'm deeper into science than others. I know more about mathematics than others. I'm a better artist or player than others. That's all just in aparavidya. So Maya, behind all of it, is fooling people. And we'll see how that happens more, because a lot of teaching about remembrance and forgetfulness is a very simple teaching to use to get yourself up and out. That's why some people just like to just go and meditate on the source. If it's her, good. What do we ask her for? Fulfillment of desires? Or pure knowledge, pure love, and pure devotion? Those are the things that she likes very much. And probably another thing that she would love very much is, will you give me discriminating intelligence to know the difference between apara and para, to know the difference between Brahman and Maya, to know the difference between Prakriti and Purusha, and so forth. So a little introduction and reading from this article on each one of these facets. So we're here as we work our way down. So let's look quickly from the top to the bottom. There is the transcendent light of pure conscious awareness. And I should read this here at the bottom, which my teacher used to quote, by Percy Shelley, the great Western poet. The one remains, the many change and pass. Heaven's light forever shines. Earth's shadows fly. Life, like a dome of many-colored glass, stains the white radiance of eternity. So, we just read this, right? Well, here's one of the artists called a poet who had some different thinking about Maya, about apara and apara. Was he just into his poem, into fame and into making money off of it? Or was he dharmically thinking about a great thought like this that probably came to him from the teachings of India, from the Upanishads and other great sources, Bhagavad Gita, which was going around at that time in Europe and America. So here you have this, you say, wow, heaven's light shines, earth's shadows fly. See, life is nice, well say mind. Mind is a many-colored dome. And there's a light beyond it, but when it hits that dome, it turns into many colors like a prism. And those colors are beautiful and attractive and all that, but they could be leading you to a lot of refracted light. And what about if my dome isn't in very good shape? See, dome, get it? You see, if my mind-brain complex is not sane, because insanity is one of those evolutes nowadays, I think, that we would suspect people are just acting in insane ways. So anyway, there's where we go from the transcendent light to Shelley's beautiful description of this whole thing, which really my teacher reading that occasionally or saying it, he had it memorized, not verbatim, but mostly. He would say it from the podium, and so 20, 30 years later, I was thinking about this chart with that. And this quote gave me the idea for this. So there you see, if you come out of transcendent light, over here, this is the clarifying teaching of higher and lower wisdom. And Vivekananda says here, or Valmiki says in this case, lower knowledge taken from books and conventional religious knowledge gleaned from ordinary shastras form two separate hells for beings devoid of higher wisdom. Even intelligent beings writhe in these two states, fixating on wealth, status, and power. Therefore, you should exert inwardly and swiftly attain to transcendent wisdom, taking refuge in the great self, Atman. Valmiki was also one of the influences for the young Ram, the avatar. So out of the transcendent light of pure conscious awareness, first thing you'd probably see is Om. And so there you are, the word. And everything that's suggested by Om or around Om, there you see Paravidya starting off the whole thing, you see. And it comes down to Aparavidya as it enters into the realm of the Vedangas, not the Vedanta, that's up here, but the Vedangas are limbs in India that should be studied, but not without knowledge, as she's saying here, of the higher truth first. And pretty soon Aparavidya could just go straight to Avidya. That's what this is leading you towards. And we'll look at that after the break. After Om, because I'm not taking a lot of time, hold on to whatever you're wearing, hats, dhotis, pants, skirts, because we're going to go whipping through this, and you can look at it later. There you see Nirbija Samadhi, that's seedless. That's up there at the level of transcendent. And seedless means there's no names and forms. Maya is not there. It's been put back in abeyance. It's not in operation yet. Then level of consciousness, Sakshi Chaitanya is there. There's a witness, as I was saying, to all phenomena. Phenomena that as yet may not even be happening, or is happening all the time, take your pick. But you're not aware of it because you've transcended it. And Vijnana is that special wisdom that comes from having samadhi. Jnana is wisdom that comes from studying and hearing the teachings and so forth. Vijnana is given a higher place. That's more like Paravidya itself. It comes from having had samadhi. So had that, then this knowledge is translating itself into everything you do, think, and teach. Then you have sabija. So first it was a seated samadhi. Unseated samadhi. Now it's turning into a seated samadhi as the light begins to hit these higher tattvas of Om. And across from that you see Savikopa Samadhi. So that's samadhi that's similar to sabija. It's samadhis that have seeds, that have tattvas, like meditating on very high things that are giving you very deep peace, bliss, and wisdom, but not yet the idea of going beyond witness consciousness, which is listed there. And I put there on either side of Om the Kali Avatar and the Matri Avatar, Sri Ramakrishna and Sri Sharda Devi. And underneath them, Swami Vivekananda, the Nityasiddha, and Swami Brahmananda, the Jagadguru, right next to the Trinity on one side and Mahashakti on the other. So they're always watching this process. They're really taking Om, the vibrations of that Mahamaya, and turning it into 4 levels of vibration, right? That's what the scripture said. Para, Pashanti, Madhyama, and Vaikari, which we can look at next in the Om chart, briefly. So all of this is coming out of this very high tattva or principle called AUM and Turiya. It's in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God kind of teaching. Or I could have chosen the bell chart. I almost did. You strike that bell, tum, T-O-M means A-U-M, and you strike it, its sound sustains, dissolves, and then it's all silence again. So how many times is it going to be struck? So they say in the Tantras, nobody strikes the word Om. It strikes itself all the time. It's vibrating constantly. And so Sri Ramakrishna said about it, I'm getting a little ahead of the teachings, but she said about it, that when I first saw the Om inside of myself, I saw that worlds were coming out of it and dissolving back into it, and no time was passing. It's a very powerful statement, a very rare thing to share with anyone. As we just read Yoga Vashishta, right? You don't share these things with people, except if they've qualified or heard this, because why? Is that because it's a secret doctrine and we want to keep it all to ourselves? No, it's because it's going to harm them. They're going to think about it all wrong, and they're going to broadcast it all wrong to other people. So there's a very practical reason why you're very careful with whom you select to share these teachings with. It's like Holy Mother saying, I gave you initiation, my dear, because I thought you were a noble soul. Please don't betray me. So if you shared the mantra with someone, if you were qualified to do so, and they're using it now, and they're keeping holy company with you and you with them, then it's got to be based on that very high-minded premise. Holy company, if you want to call it that. Coming further down from that and moving along, you see these words yukti on one side and dharma on the other. So you need to be analyzing. Yukti is not a good word in English, analyzing, but it really means reasoning and ruminating on the teachings that are given by the avatars and so forth. And so you see that next. The next you see shruti and morals. So one side of this dome has all these certain kinds of principles, and the other kind has other kinds of principles that really go together. So to hear the truth and to live a moral, ethical life are placed side by side there as streaming particles of intelligence work their way down to the world. Manaha kalpita jagat, right here. Manaha kalpita jagat. It's the idea of the world in the mind. That's what that means. So if you know about this, how the world came into being, then, sorry, Mr. Darwin, I can't fall into your hands anymore. You did a marvelous thing on the physical level, but you don't know the origins, not just of species on Earth, you don't know the origins to human races, where they came from. Like from Krishna, from Lord Vashishta and his 10 mind-born sons. This goes back in, not backwards in space, in time, or up in space, as I've often said. This goes back in to the source of your consciousness and all these connections that you have to make if you want to get Paravidya again. Next, and not taking a lot of time, of course they put religion on one side and philosophy on the other. They should go hand in hand, Vivekananda said. My teacher also often taught that too. Vivekananda's quote about that, paraphrasing it. He says, religion is good to a point, but it has a problem of becoming sentimental. Philosophy, very fine, also, but it has a problem of becoming too sterile. What you want is putting the two together. And that's what India always has done. Always checked its religion with its philosophies, and they weren't two competing factions, or divided, in not only in life but in educational systems, just divided. Well, what are you taking a course in? Well, religions. We're religions. Well, aren't you taking philosophy too? Oh no, what's that have to do with it? You see, it's like insanity. Anyone? So then coming down, and I also did the same with one of my fields, my best fields, fine arts as compared to applied arts. See, I put those opposite. I have experience in religion, philosophy, and fine arts, being a professional musician and trained for it in both Indian and Western classical music and other forms of music too. Had good training in those, and therefore I can declare, it's one music with many expressions. And that would be putting them in this dome, connected with each other. Now you have, without taking a lot of time, I did the same with psychology and science in these two little windows. We should also probably put those side by side and try and connect them. Because India did that. What was it called? It's the science of psychology. There's one word for it. Yoga. That is the science of psychology. So they have, with yoga, the 8-limb yoga I'm talking about, of course, Patanjali, and the 4 yogas, and Purna yoga, and so forth. You have this perfect combination of the mind, psychology of the mind, and what to do with it, what not to do with it, put together with this scientific approach to it. A laboratory, everything has to be clean and sacred and held sacrosanct and so forth. Well, there's the 6 lower limbs, Vedangas. So I paste myself here. Phonetics, grammar, etymology, meter, ritual, and astronomy are the Vedangas. And there are other lesser Vedangas too, like even the art of going to war with integrity and those kinds of things, if you can't actually settle it by peaceful means. So these are called the 6 limbs of lower knowledge. And every young man and woman was supposed to take those in India in the olden days, and have their guru teaching them Paravidya and having the teachers teaching them Aparavidya. Like if you didn't have an archery teacher, what were you doing in Hindu society, right? What are you aiming at? The story, right? All the students standing by the river. Remember that story? And the archer, was it Bhima or whoever went along and huh?
Arjuna said, "My arrow's in the fish."
Yeah, you ruined it.
Sorry.
You ruined it. But nobody heard it anyway, so it's okay. So basically, a teacher goes along and they're all aiming at trying to hit the fish. So what are you aiming at? At the fish. What are you aiming at? I'm aiming at the body of the fish. What are you aiming at? The head. What are you aiming at? It? The eye. So you've got 4 different kinds of great, lesser to great students there. Finally, he comes to Ram and asks him, or maybe it was Arjuna, I can't remember. Probably Arjuna, and asks him, where are you aiming at? My arrow's already in the fish. So this is non-duality. This is, philosophically speaking, the whole story speaks of that knowledge of oneness at all times. And you shouldn't have to forget that because of Divine Mother's presence in you. She put the Atman in you for that reason. So you would have awareness. And also, to check it, put discriminating wisdom next, so that you could always remain in knowledge of your true self. That's our Divine Mother. Now, as you come back down, you see Manaha Kalpita Jagat, the world created by the mind, something that every true thinker in India has to know. That's the view. It's in the pillars of Zen, it's in the Mahamudra teachings, Tibetan Buddhism, it's everywhere that all of this is mind made manifest. If you want to hear Sri Sharda Devi talk about it in the 1900s, all of this is mind made manifest. So that's the source of everything you're going back to. The mind has its source back in intelligence and in Om. And you see the whole thing like this. And where you run afoul of it, we'll look at later, when you fall below, making this distinction between Aparavidya and Paravidya. You see where I'm going with this. Apara and Aparavidya and Paravidya. They're at the top and bottom of this ladder. So these charts being used conjointly. That's about as much as I'm going to say about it, except when this great light reaches the earth, then there are signs of it, both positive and negative. On the left-hand side there you see Jyoti, Mithyadrishta, Karma Sakshi, Manojaya, Jivan Mukti, and Nirmoha. Those are basically the light of intelligence, being able to see through illusion or appearances, also being an observer of all the works you do, and having victory over the powers of your mind, Manojaya, which is the name of one of my students, Jivan Mukti, a living liberated being, and Nirmoha, being free of delusion. And on the other side, that's actually on the sun-facing side of the world, and the dark side of the world, the moon, is Tamishra, Michachar, Karmapara, actually the opposite of a lot of these things. So that covers both quotes and a quick run through what the difference of para and aparavidya is. So that will help us in our determination. Now let's go back to the chart, because you can study that later, and I hope everyone does, of the Evolutes, characteristics, and limiting factors of Maya. So if you want to look at the word next, and we do, because this rather surprising teaching, I saw a few mouth drop here in the room when I said it, that even all of Om is under Maya. That's of course under Mahamaya. That's her word, her pool of potential. Saraswati. If you say Saraswati or Sarada, who's our own Divine Mother in this age, Shri Sharada Devi, then Sara means, can be determined as a pool of potential, a pool of essence, Sara. So that means that basically she oversees and operates from the Shaktiman position, the whole word. Because they say, find the word inside yourself, right? If you do the dissolution of the mind practice, you get to a high position like the word, you hear it, you follow it, you realize it, and you're out of time when you're there. You're beyond kala, time, and probably not cognizant of space either in the ordinary sense. So all of a sudden you are invested with the word, and it's vibrating everywhere and everything. Even when you come out of that high condition, you see and feel the vibration, like in the tanmatras and so forth. So you're left with a very profound and almost palpable feeling of Om in everything, even when you're back to your so-called ordinary state of things. So this is her pool of wisdom, as we say, Om. So there you see it vibrates or doesn't, as the case may be, in four ways. So before the break, maybe, because I also want to present this quickly so we keep moving on. In this main chart we're going to be taking for 3 weeks, you see the beautiful double waterfalls there, and the castle in the sky, the rainbow, all things beautiful. And if you take this chart also from its topmost tier, that's called para. We just looked at paravidya, so we already know pretty well what that word means, and aparavidya too. So you can almost superimpose paravidya, in the first two of these, and then start assuming that aparavidya kicks in when Om is vibrating more grossly. That is, when lesser tattvas are beginning to appear, and minds, souls are living in realms where they are obeying the rules of these particular tattvas, like say in the earth with gravity and physical space. So as the story between Lord Brahma and Lord Vashishta, the mind-born son, there's Paravak there, pure knowledge abiding as Atman. Paravak means the supreme word. It's the essence of Shabda, which is the path to God through sound, Shabda Brahma. It's formless form of Mahashakti right there. See? So it's in her, it's with her, it's permeating her. And it's the I in fullness. So this is like beyond ripe and unripe ego, but even beyond witness. It's just the essence of something, which is Shiva and Shakti. And of course, well, I'll get to that later, but that arrow is pointing towards that teaching. That's the static, stationary, imperishable level of the word. Like Sri Ramakrishna saying it, seeing worlds coming out of it, but no time is passing. It's just like it moves, but it doesn't. It exists, but it doesn't. It's almost like Maya itself, Sat Asat. It's indeterminable, and yet there it is, humming and dancing, or humming and causing everything to dance by the very nature of vibration. Everything to move by that. That's one more thing to say about that level of the word, is that there's no mentation there. All ideas are back in their source. They're not coming out again until some space for them can be created. So this is where kala, time, and space, desha, the fivefold maya, come into the quotient at the very deepest level of things, because this vibration cannot be, it's like trying to hold a fire in a cotton cloth. You see, it just cannot be contained. And if it's going to manifest through Lord Brahma's great bijams and Vashishta's guidance and so forth, the seer's teachings, then it's going to have a space, a very elevated space, to which to make its first appearance at the level of highest intelligence. So streaming particles of intelligence, right? Streaming particles of intelligence are coming down out of that word and forming worlds in space and time. Worlds that are the kingdoms of heaven within you, if you wish. They're very subtle worlds. In fact, they're causal first, then they're subtle, then they're gross. And the four stages of the word are almost dictating those, the AUM of Om. You see, as that's happening. So a space has to be provided for it. If it's the great mind you're talking about instead of Om, although it's hard to split them, then you're talking about this mind all of a sudden decided it's going to conceive of something powerful, a great idea, as it were. And that's pashanti, means it starts to think. So it provides space for a thought to happen. I've tried to explain this before in other teachings on this chart and around Maya and Mahamaya. Very hard to find words for it, but you have to kind of taste it. So you're going to have to meditate on it and connect it to your own thoughts and thinking back on your own birth and before your own birth, and meditating on all the steps and so forth. Any way you can do, from deja vu all the way up to actual meditation on the alambanas, you should do that to try and bring forth some memory of the truth of this, because it just needs that little memory to bring the house of cards falling down. A house of cards you constructed that you're not happy with. A house of cards called the physical world that nobody's happy with, not for long. And the teaching says so. So in the remaining time here, let's see what pashanti, because you can see I took a bunch of little bijams, little seeds, and put them into an Om to kind of give you an idea there that that's where these bijams are beginning to find their space to germinate, if you want. It's so obvious that's what's happening everywhere, even on the physical world. Throw seeds and, little rain, earth, water, the 5 subtle bijams, the pancha mahabhutas, they call them, and growth happens. So pashanti is defined there as a transcendent state, whereas para can't even be given that assignment, you see. So transcendent means intelligence at the plane of pure ideas. Doesn't do it justice, but will have to do. And so it's pashantivaka means undifferentiated unity. So unity was just all-pervasive, if you could say that, and then all of a sudden it takes on a state of undifferentiated unity. Later on, it's going to become differentiated unity when it's in the mind and being thought about. And finally, it's going to become gross sound and gross speech. So all of this chart, you can look at it later, live streaming as well, when you look back on it, to study each one of these subdivisions, because it's yet another way, and it falls all under the teaching, the great teaching of the Mahashakti, Mahamaya, that all of this is going on simultaneously to, the light streaming down in intelligent particles, or the sound beginning to manifest as objects, subtle first, or causal, then subtle, then gross, to where you find yourself here in your own body with vibrating particles and 5 elements and tattvas, and access to these inner worlds. If you want to be an intrepid spiritual wayfarer and look back to the source of things, then you'll find yourself in access of all of this. You know what I'm coming from is Sakshi Chaitanya, right? It's right there at the top of that last chart, Paravidya. You're the witness of all of this, so you know it all. Now, can I go down into the worlds of name and form and keep my memory of it? I think some souls try that. Some souls are saying, no way, I'm going to forget this. Other souls are going to saying, not really a past master yet. I think I'll go down and try and keep my memory of it. You see, how much of it can I hold, especially in the Kali Yuga, amidst all that erratic vibration? What was it called? Vichitra, right? Getting involved in so many varieties. Almost sounds like the Sanskrit word. Varieties, Vichitra. And how that takes people's mind in every different way except this one and most important aspect or principle of pure conscious awareness that is at the foundation of it all. So to finish up here, so we can take our break, there you see under Prashanti, Shabda or Spota, the subtle sound, Shakti force. And that's where I want to get to showing you about the 4 different kinds of Shaktis, which we'll do after the break. But there you see the Bijams, arranged in Om form, symbolically, and the English definition there, potential for manifestation. It doesn't get ready to manifest till the middling stage. Madhyama means middling, but it's getting ready to manifest. So you might also say gross, causal, gross, subtle, and causal are good words to put to these. Waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. Good words to put to these so that you understand them. Of course, this is happening on a vast cosmological level. Cosmological means here in consciousness, not in space alone. So I'll leave you with that now to tease in your mind and to meditate on, and we'll return in 15 minutes and go further on in this 16 Evolutes of Maya. I might have made the announcement early on that we probably won't even get to the 16 Evolutes until next week, but it's a good thing because these you'll have to put on your forbearance hats and listen to what happens to people, so many of them, who don't keep their discriminating wisdom handy and who forget about their true nature, their divine nature. So here, then, let's take our break. Namaste.